JD Vance has been leading the White House cover-up of the Epstein Files. Explosive new reporting in the New York Times came out yesterday that details how senior White House officials, led by Vice President JD Vance, including people like Chief of Staff Susie Wiles, Kash Patel, Pam Bondi, Todd Blanche, Greg Bovino, and so many others, sat in the White House Situation Room to strategize about how they would cover up the Epstein Files. The details were astounding to read. We've long suspected, I've been saying this is the most egregious cover-up in American history, but to see that people like Vice President JD Vance were sitting and talking about ideas like, let's have Tucker Carlson go interview Ghislaine Maxwell, who is convicted of one of the most insane and horrific child sex trafficking operations ever, so that she can take the blame off of Donald Trump. Those are the kinds of ideas that Vice President JD Vance was suggesting, and the entire thing is crazy. Highly recommend. Every single American needs to read this. I'm actually back here at the Donald Trump and Jeffrey Epstein Files reading room. This is in Washington, D.C., meeting with survivors of Epstein, Maxwell, and so many other rich and powerful men. I was here yesterday, and I want to share something compelling that one of the survivors said. So she, grew up like any other child in America, trusting the government, believing that the government would help her if anything happened. She suffered abuse at the hands of Epstein when she was just a teenager. She said the way that the Department of Justice released her personal information during this botched release, and the way the government has failed to hold any one of these perpetrators accountable, has been more traumatizing than the abuse itself. The government has not only failed these survivors and failed women across this country, but now, with this cover-up, we not only have the crimes themselves, but the cover-up that needs to be investigated as well. This reporting is the first time we've really seen how JD Vance himself has been involved in this, and that is why it's so important that he now needs to come before the Oversight Committee. He needs to be subpoenaed, and he needs to testify under oath in front of the American people. We will ensure that every single one of these people is held accountable. This is a criminal enterprise in this White House, and they are protecting pedophiles at the expense of everybody else.
Let's give it a quick drop and split the orange clean in half.
I think the question that needs to be asked is who's leaking this, and why do they want to distance themselves from the president's position on the Epstein Files? Because it could get worse.
Dropsite's Julian Andreoni here. New reporting confirms that JD Vance, Susie Wiles, Pam Bondi, Todd Blanche, Kash Patel, and Dan Bongino all met in the Situation Room last year to devise a plan to cover up the Epstein Files. The Situation Room has historically been used to discuss matters of national security. Does that imply that the Epstein ring was an intelligence operation? Is there a national security threat here? And why would the Trump administration want to cover up these files? Is he criminally implicated? Let's see what members of Congress had to say.
Trump's not in the Epstein files.
No, he is.
He's not in the Epstein files. He didn't do anything wrong. My position is this: just because you went to the damn island doesn't mean you're out there doing stupid things. So if anybody ever got on his plane, they're guilty of being a sexual predator.
Well, something to look into.
Listen, they've been looking at,
with full transparency.
They've been looking at this thing for decades. How come you weren't talking about this crap when Biden was in office?
I think people were talking about it.
Nobody was talking about it because nobody did anything. Nobody did anything. Let it go, people.
Let go of the Epstein Files.
You gotta let this go, because everybody just wants to talk about this. You don't want to talk about the Trump successes. All the success. You want to just talk about Epstein.
Not only is he in them, but a whole network of powerful and elite people who prop up our political system and have financed our political system are in them, and powerful people beyond just financially powerful people are in them as well. And I think that it's a big part of what exposes a lot of how our system works.
Given they were in the Situation Room, you think there's any intelligence ties? Do you think there's anything to worry about national security wise?
I think it's a good question, and I think that, to me, I think that there are obvious intelligence issues, because you have an entire international network of people and very deep compromise that is tied in with all of them. And so how that has been weaponized in the specific ways is something that we should all be paying attention to and figure out.
I don't know whether or not the Room was being used just because Donald Trump and his friends consider the Epstein Files such a threat to them individually, or whether it means that there was some kind of foreign intelligence dimension to the operation. But we're never going to find out unless we actually get the administration to comply with the Epstein Files Transparency Act. They have got to turn all of the files over. They're withholding 3 million of them.
Was the New York Times in the Situation Room with them?
So you're saying it might have been a leak, or you're saying that the information that they got is
clearly has a axe to grind with the White House and with the majority of American people, and I don't trust them, and I think that's why they're probably going to go out of business like most printed media is.
Let's give it a quick drop and split the orange clean in half.
A bombshell investigative report out of the New York Times detailing the long-running issues in the Epstein scandal, which caused an internal freakout at the Trump White House. This reporting is actually through the process that we've sometimes seen before, where journalists who work at an outlet on a daily sort of beat also work on longer form projects and books. And so the reporting is, we should mention, part of an upcoming book by several of the top sort of Trump White House reporters and DC reporters on the beat. And they, in this process, actually say they spoke to over 1,000 sources. So this is more than even just one or two big articles. This is drawing off of all of that, and it reports how the Trump White House officials and administration looked at the Epstein scandal as so serious. Top officials were gathering in the White House Situation Room. That is, of course, the secure bunker where classified high-stakes national security matters are discussed. For contrast, it's not a place where you deal with political domestic spin. It's where this historic moment occurred, where President Obama and Vice President Biden were tracking, along with the national security team, the ongoing operation to take out and kill Osama bin Laden. That was 2011. That's the Situation Room, at least when used by presidents who take it seriously. The Times noting the Trump officials used it to try to gain measure of control over a very different kind of crisis threatening to engulf the presidency. They continue to use the situation for those discussions. The Times reports that by summer 25, the Situation Room itself had become basically inseparable from the Epstein crisis. This is more than a matter of staging. It sort of tells you about the use, abuse, and misplaced priorities, according to critics, of how they dealt with the Epstein crisis.
Let's give it a quick drop and split the orange clean in half.